Adventure riding tours, what are they? What do you get for it? Why would you spend the money when you can go out and ride on your own? Well, let's have a look at some of the benefits of doing a tour and what's the difference between doing a tour and going out riding on your own. All right, number one is it's easier. So you don't have to think about planning. You don't need to think about fuel stops, where you're going to, how far is too far as kilometers to be able to get there on tank for everyone. You don't need to think about how long has it been since we've eaten and when do we need to stop. So you can take all that out, someone else is dealing with that. There is a lot of time that goes into mapping, and it's really easy to kind of set out a basic path, but when you start refining that path into, are there gates, are there things in the way here, am I going to get blocked by, is this water too deep, etc., then that's where all the time goes. And so what you're paying for is someone to do that. Now the other key thing about that is that they're also going to pre-ride. They're going to go down that path a week or so beforehand and check to see whether it's still okay. They've already got all that sorted. They've gone and actually spent that money to do that ride, paid for fuel, paid for accommodation to stay somewhere the night, etc., so they can pre-ride to ensure that the ride that you go on is going to be interruption free. That's pretty cool. You get support. Sweep riders will have first aid equipment with them, but then you've got the support vehicle is going to have a bit more equipment there, and all those guys are then obviously trained as well on first aid, so you've got that there as support. And of course they know what to do when shit goes wrong. Unfortunately, sometimes things do go wrong, and while uncommon, it can happen. Knowing what to do in that situation is really key, and those guys are trained in knowing what to do. Another key thing is knowledge. You get to learn a lot on these trips. Usually the people running the tour will give lots of tips and information. Some of them will run nightly things to say, give you some information, etc. Latest products, all that sort of stuff. There's also an opportunity to get advice from people who are seeing you ride. Some people aren't open to hearing advice about their riding style and whether they could critique it a little bit. Personally, I'm very open to hearing. So if they're going to give me some advice saying, oh, you may be better off being a little bit like this rather than like that, that's gold for me. That stuff I think is fantastic. It's invaluable to make your riding better. Plus, of course, you're learning from other riders. You get to observe what other riders do and how they approach certain situations, etc. And they see how you approach things as well. So again, you can exchange notes between each other. So you're learning from each other. You also get to learn new areas. So there'll be places that you'll probably go to that you haven't been to before. So you can always follow those routes again in the future, but you get to learn all these new places. That in itself is money well spent. Of course, you can also learn about places on motorides.com.au. Tours typically fall into a couple of categories. There is the guided tour, there's the fully supported, and then there's like the high-end exclusivity style ride. So RideADV, Aussie Bike or Hike, one of my favorites, they're the supported guide type. So they essentially are going to guide you through the ride. They're there for support and so on, but you're riding the ride on your own. You book and spend your own accommodation, so you can choose where you want to spend the night and how much you want to spend. Same with meals. They generally will book a table, but you don't have to join that. So it's really flexible. You're spending, apart from the ride itself, you're paying for them to organize the ride. However, you then get to have that flexibility and decisions around where you stay and all that sort of stuff. Generally a couple $100 for those. They're pretty cheap depending on how many days they are. Then there's also the fully supported ones like BMW Safari, KTM Rallye, those sorts of rides. You're paying a little bit more. You're going to be spending roughly a couple of grand on those, right? So those ones, they will book everything as far as accommodation and meals and so on are included. So you might have to book accommodation on either end of it, etc. But generally the meals and the accommodation during and the middle of the ride, they take care of all of that. So you're spending a little bit extra, but you're getting the whole sort of turn up and do the ride. Now the top end of that scale, then you're spending 10 grand plus. Those rides are where there's some sort of exclusivity, or it's fully supported, bike included, in that. So something like Daryl Beattie's rides, which is like an 18-day ride, really long, fully supported. They supply the bike, you just turn up and jump on it. Those you're paying a lot more money for it, obviously, because of that fully supported element, right? So if you drop the bike, you damage things and so on, it's their bike. Obviously you don't want to do that, but it's if you don't yet have your own bike, or you're thinking about doing something that's a bit tougher like Cape York, where maybe you have something like this and it's not really suited for Cape York, then you do those rides and they supply like a DRZ or something like that. Daryl Beattie's Hondas, or it might be something where it has some exclusivity. So Compass Expeditions, you can book a ride where Charlie Borman comes along. So you're kind of paying for that exclusivity. It's a nice ride, mostly sealed, from what I understand. I haven't been on it myself, but you get to meet, one of the people who invented adventure riding. So that's pretty cool. That's going to raise some controversy. Did Charlie Borman invent adventure riding? My personal view is I like both. I like doing both. I like the enjoyment of the relaxing ride where I don't need to think about anything, and I learn a whole bunch of new skills and new areas to ride, and then I take that and I put that into my self-riding tours, self-riding ride. I think it's worth spending the money to do at least probably one a year, personally. It's also something to look forward to. You book it in, you spend the money, and then you look forward to it. So both. Do both. Why not do both?